Hello everyone, I'm Joe Cronin and welcome to the Toss-Up. It's officially time to break out the bats as the Indiana baseball season is upon us. We have a great set of panelists and potentially a special guest, so stick around and yes, of course, buckled up because it's all next on the Toss-Up. The college baseball season is officially back, and there are plenty of things to talk about for the Indiana Hoosiers this season. Who will be the ace? Who will break out this season at the bats? And what will it take to return to the postseason? And here to dive into the Hoosiers baseball team, we have a great set of panelists here today. Ben Hauer of the Hoosier Network repping a brand new tie. Also from the Hoosier Network, Mason Williams. And, of course, SI's very own, the eternal pessimist, Matt Byrne. Gentlemen, thank you so much for joining us in the studio today.
Okay.
I'm happier now that you mentioned my tie and you mentioned him being the E.
Yes.
Wait, what's my thing?
You're not wearing a tie.
That is my
Mason Tyler Williams is with us today.
Now you're just making me feel bad.
Yeah. Well, we got some baseball to talk about. Only 4 games into the season, yes, but a lot of good non-con schedule. Big Ten's going to be a good race this year, but coming off the week was a baseball at the beach in Myrtle Beach, Coastal Carolina, the host. I guess just a quick recap of that weekend, and obviously just had the Tuesday game against Miami. Ben, I'll go to you first. What have you noticed from the early start of the season from the Hoosiers?
I thought the pitching depth might take a little time just with how young they are, but there have been so many arms that have stepped up big time for Indiana in their 3 wins. You know, Tuesday against Miami, that's the game where you really throw a lot of arms just to see what you have. But over the weekend, there were not really anyone who struggled. The guy who struggled the most on the weekend was who a lot of people expected to be the most sure-handed coming into the year in Ryan Kraft. I've been really impressed with the pitching staff as a whole.
It was a 2-1 weekend in Myrtle. Obviously got that big win over Coastal. Mason?
Yeah, I'll also note on the pitching depth, I think a lot of the questions that probably all of us had on this panel about this team this year, and certainly a lot of the eyes that are on this team this year, kind of revolved around the starting pitching. And I think we saw some really good performances from Braden Reisdorf, from Connor Foley, and then obviously on Sunday, Indiana just needed to kind of get through that game as well. So I think we saw Ethan Phillips start that game on Sunday, but we'll see kind of what happens with that. But yeah, I think obviously we saw what we thought we would see with this Indiana lineup so far. They're playing good defense, and I think the pitching, at least it's early, right? It's early, but some of the questions about the pitching depth and kind of who's going to start, who's going to fill what role have been answered just a little bit, but I want to see a little bit more from first.
It is tough to totally have clear-cut answers when there's only been 4 games and it's such a long season that we have to span. But Byrne, obviously, it was really close in all the games up until, 6th, 7th inning and all 3 in Myrtle, I guess. What did you notice?
Well, in the opening weeks of the season, the biggest key is just getting a win over a Southern team. That's going to carry so much weight. And so for Indiana to only lose by 3 runs to Duke is good. You don't get blown out. That's solid. That's okay, even though it's a loss. For Indiana to get the win over Coastal, that's huge. We were talking about that. That might hold up as an incredible win down the stretch. And then you go 2-1. It's a very solid weekend. Last season, Indiana went 2-4 against Southern teams. But again, even still, they had a chance to maybe go 3-3. That would have helped out more. But even just to go 2-4 kind of really, helped Indiana's RPI down the line, really made them an NCAA tournament lock. So it's a very good start for Indiana. Duke was a winnable game, and I guess you can look back at that. And if it's a winnable game, it would help so much. But it's a solid start, and they're going to have more chances to beat Southern teams.
I will add that I think I made a note of it too. Is like there's never too early for a statement win. Even if it's only the second game, like that Coastal game was, and like we were talking about, like, it's never a bad thing to have a win that you can look back on so early in the season. And now I think also with some of the other games that we'll get into talking about later, you kind of raise the expectation level a little bit, knowing that they went out there and competed in those first 3 games, and then obviously took care of business at home against Miami. But yeah, I think it's been a solid start to the season for them so far.
I definitely want to touch in on the non-con schedule later in the episode. I do want to touch on something that, Mason, you mentioned. It is, who is the ace? Luke Sennard, the news was broke back in late summer that he'd be out for the season with that surgery, the season-ending surgery. And Byrne, I'll start this with you. Who is the ace of this year? Who's going to be the Friday starter? Obviously, we know how Mercer is with his pitching committee. Who do you think it will be?
Well, Indiana's going to need multiple aces. If the expectation is for them to go back to a regional and to try to make the supers, you're just going to need guys every single day to be able to give you a lot of innings, good starts, give your offense a chance, especially when Indiana's offense is so good this year. So I think that in terms of the ace role, that's probably going to be split amongst sophomores Braden Reisdorf and Connor Foley. They both had great starts over the weekend, and I think that longevity now is just the biggest question for them.
Reisdorf started that game against Duke, had a pretty solid outing too. Mason, who's the ace?
Yeah, I think it's another one of those things that's probably a little bit too early to tell. I'll stick with Matt and say that it's probably going to be one of Braden or Connor that kind of fills that role. But we're talking about Luke Sennard. He did obviously establish himself as the ace of this team throughout the rest of the season. But at the beginning of the year, his role wasn't even solidified yet. He started a few Saturdays. He started a Sunday, I believe, even last year a little bit. So I know, especially in these preseason, I guess if you want to call them preseason tournaments, these early season multi-team events where you're playing some different caliber opponents on different days. It's not necessarily you're lining up needing to win the first game of a series based on who you're playing. Indiana might opt to go a little bit more matchup oriented with some of these opportunities as well. So I think we'll probably have a clearer picture of this maybe 3 or 4 weeks into the season, but I would probably venture to guess it's going to be one of Reisdorf or Foley.
I mean, there's a realistic chance that we look back on this episode and are completely baffled by what we're saying, could be completely wrong, and I guess that leads to Ben. Who do you think will be?
Not me. I'm never wrong.
Go ahead and stick your olive branch out there.
No, it's interesting because I think coming into the weekend, the plan was just to have Braden Reisdorf as your Friday starter. After that, you didn't know. I mean, Connor Foley, and Mercer says this all the time, it made him look smart by starting him because he had such a great start on Saturday. But it wasn't set in stone from the beginning that Foley was going to be the Saturday guy. It was just going to be matchup-wise, if they needed him on Friday, he would have thrown on Friday. And my prediction is if they need him any Friday to come in relief behind Reisdorf, I think that's a real possibility. I think this whole pitch by committee thing means there's only one starter named a weekend, and everyone's going to be up and ready for Friday, and everyone's going to have to be ready if they don't go Friday to maybe start Saturday or start Sunday. And that's what happens when you have so many guys. Now, if Foley can throw 4 innings like this, like he did against Coastal Carolina, that gives you more structure. That gives you a surefire Saturday guy. So that's why it's going to be interesting moving forward. But for the foreseeable future, I do think it's going to be Reisdorf, that Friday guy, for a while at least.
Now, Ben, I'll just ask you this real quick. With some of the star-studded batting depth that it seems this Hoosiers team has, do you think it gives them a little bit of leeway to have this pitch by committee?
Well, it's funny. You're going to know that we've been listening to Mercer a lot when we say this, but their motto is 6 runs or less. He says that all the time, but every pitcher we've talked to for Indiana says that. So it's hard. A lot of it's matchup based, like I said, so it depends on the game. But yeah, I mean, this would be a lot more difficult to do this whole pitch by committee thing if the offense wasn't so good, it wasn't so talented, and have so much potential to break out late in games. That's something they did a lot last season. You had a close 3-2, 4-3 game in the first 6 innings, and this is a lineup that was persistent, that kept at it, and they piled on a lot in the last 3 innings of the games last year.
That's something we even saw last night with the Miami game. That game was kind of back and forth a little bit. Indiana necessarily wasn't winning probably as comfortably as they would have liked to over a team like Miami, and then just really down the stretch, I think Miami pulls to within 2 in the 8th inning, and then Indiana strings together a few hits, finally gets some situational pieces going, and really just kind of makes that game comfortable heading into the 9th inning. So I think that's kind of going along with Ben's point. Like, there is certainly an added comfort that this lineup gives the pitching staff, but it's obviously up to the guys that are on the mound to get the outs when they're called upon.
I want to keep it on the bats with this next question. This is a team that's bringing back a lot of talent when it comes to hitting and adding some good faces as well that definitely can make some noise when they get their name called. You got guys like Tyler Sherney, Carter Matheson, Brock Tibbitts, and of course Devin Taylor, the preseason All-American. And Byrne, I'll go back to you with this one. Who's going to lead the team in hitting? And then I'll follow it up with who do you think's having a breakout year?
Well, I mean, I think that Devin Taylor is going to lead the team in hitting. I think maybe a preseason question was whether he was going to run into the sophomore slump, and it's only 4 games, but clearly right now he is nowhere clear.
Sitting 500.
Yeah,
yes.
there's nowhere clear to that as well. I think in terms of breakout season, Mason and I were chatting that Tyler Sherney has done really well at the dish, and last season, He was a really solid defender at second base, and maybe there was a few questions of if he moved to shortstop, would his bat sort of suffer because of that? Just getting back into the groove of shortstop. He's made great plays defensively. He's done very well at the plate. So that's the Taylor leading the team and Cerny having a breakout year.
I believe it was that Coastal game. He made a play at shortstop that easily could have been on a Sports Center top 10. I think it was an athletic play. He was making plays all week and made a few against Miami as well. Who do you think's breaking out on the bats?
I think it's tough for me to not look at what Brock Tibbitts did last year in his sophomore season, hitting over 400 and not kind of pick him to be the guy again this year. He's been a guy that has kind of walked the line of hitting for power and hitting for contact. He's line drive oriented. He can find his gaps, but he can get on base a lot as well, and then obviously poke the ball over the fence. Better than most on this team. He's got a lot of power. So I think my one question with Brock and something I'm really monitoring over this season is, does the change to catcher, does rotating back and forth from catcher to first base and not really being so much certainty there in the early portions of the season, does that affect his bat a little bit? And if it's something where if his bat is clearly better at one position, do you want to stick him there, kind of sacrifice a little bit defensively because offensively you're going to get some production from him? So I will tab Brock to be my leading hitter for this team, and you're going to hear a repeat answer, but with Tyler, I think both the strides that he's made in the early season, again, we're 4 games in, but Mercer was talking about he's already saved 5 or 6 runs for this team defensively at shortstop. He made a few great plays on Tuesday night, sliding all over the diamond. It's like his glove is double the size this year for some reason, and he's always had the arm to be able to play. He was a natural shortstop in high school as well. So I think if he can become like a 350 hitter for this team and maybe find a little bit of power, but also with where he's at in order, kind of that midpoint to knock in a few runs, get on base, and keep the line moving, I think he's a potential breakout candidate for sure.
I mean, you just have to think with a guy like Cerny, with the plays he's making defensively, it just ups the confidence so much more when he steps up to the plate. He's like, all right, I just did on that, and I'll do it on this then. Ben, who's stepping up?
So who I think will lead the team in hitting, I'll go with a different answer here. I'm fascinated by the Carter Matheson at the lead-up spot right now with Nick Mitchell being out. Mitchell should be back soon. But I think Matheson is just showing that he can do it in any part of the lineup. He can get on base when he needs to, still hitting with power at the top of the lineup. And when the lineup's as talented as Indiana's is 1 through 9, he's still getting those opportunities with guys on base at the top half of the lineup. Matheson's a guy who has just been really good first 2 seasons and has just been so close to that kind of breakout. I think he can have a Big Ten Player of the Year caliber season this year. He's going to be my pick for leading the team in hitting. Breakout, I'm not going to say Tyler Cerny a third time, but that is such a good option.
You could say Carter.
Yeah, I'm going to go Jake Stadler. Just only kind of a defensive replacement last year for Purdue. He's going to get a lot of at-bats with them. We saw coming into the year, Mercer was praising and kept saying that Tibbitts was going to catch. Tibbitts was going to catch. He's slower on that right now. Obviously, you had the injury of Shepard. We're still up in the air on that. So that means Stadler's going to get a lot more at-bats, and Mercer has talked a lot about how talented he's looked in the fall and in the offseason at the plate. So I think Jake Stadler's going to have a spectacular season, both behind the dish and at the dish.
Before we dive into what's next with the non-con and then looking into the Big Ten season, I do want to ask, with some of the injuries this team has had, and it's some pretty marquee ones, obviously, like mentioned, Sennard was back over the summer, Nick Mitchell was in the preseason right before the year started, and then obviously Shepard in that game against George Mason had that injury to his arm. Is there any concern with what's happening injury-wise, and especially in that first base catcher realm? Mason, I'll start with you.
I think there are some concerns maybe to be had with first base catcher when it comes to finding consistency, but I'm not sure necessarily if injury will play that big of a factor in it. We've talked with Mercer about this a lot, and it seems like it's a good problem to have this talented logjam really at first base and behind the plate, whether it's Stadler or Brock or even some of the guys that we haven't mentioned yet being behind the plate. And then obviously at first base, you've got Brock being able to factor in over there. And he's been in another quote where Mercer was like, he's made me look really good. Is like Brock learned to play first base in a couple weeks when he first got to IU. So he's been making Mercer look really good over there. And I would not forgive him if he was also opting to then make him look really good again at first base this year. But guys like Joey Brincheski, Cal Sefcik, I believe is the correct pronunciation of his name. Some of those guys, I think there's a talented logjam for sure. And Indiana's lineup, up and down, whether it's just at first base and catcher or in the outfield. We've talked about this as well. Is like those 9 spots are going to be coveted, and there's going to be a real battle to even get some DH swings and to get some of those spot starts on Tuesdays or in some of those weekend games. So I'm interested to see how it shakes out a little bit, but I'm not sure the Shepard injury will play too big of a factor in it, just because I don't think that necessarily the talent drop-off is as immense as maybe some people might think it is.
Just have to feel for him for the way his college career has gone so far. Was off to a hot start, too, especially at the bats. Had some nice hits out in Myrtle Beach. I do want to segue now to the non-con schedule. It's a pretty tough slate for this Hoosiers team, and I think something that Mercer has told us before, it's what they need to do. It's what they need to do to be tested. And, Ben, I'll start with you. This is a Hoosiers team that's playing 9 total regional teams and three super regional teams in the non-conference slate. And I guess what's the importance of that to set them up in the long run? Obviously, Big Ten isn't the strongest baseball conference, but you're having to play these weekend series all the time and then leading into a potential postseason berth.
Well, there are 2 ways to look at it. One, I mean, you're just going to be ready for Big Ten play. A lot of these teams are playing right now. You look at the Big Ten schedule Big Ten schedule Indiana has. They don't play Iowa. They play a lot of the other good teams of the Big Ten, but the competition they're playing in a lot of ways is better than the competition they're going to be playing in the Big Ten, at least in the first few weekends. Number 2, we saw this last year. This is going to help their resume. Even if they don't win a ton of these games, they won 1 game at Auburn, they won 1 game at Texas, they won 1 game in the Keith LeClaire Classic last year. You go 3-6 in those 9 games, still were able to make it to the NCAA tournament as an at-large bid, not winning the Big Ten tournament. You get a decent 500 record in those kind of games this season, that's when you have a chance. You start looking at if you perform really well in the Big Ten, hosting a regional is not out of the realm for this Indiana team.
So, Ben, there's still plenty of non-conference season left. Which game or one of the series, whether it's the Troy or Baylor one, are you most looking forward to?
I'm actually going to go neither of those 2. I'm really looking forward to Frisco. Because those are a lot of teams that I think are similar to Indiana. Duke's a really good team. That's a tall task for the Hoosiers, especially on Friday when they have Anthony Santucci and that really talented bullpen that they had going. Coastal Carolina was a big win. A lot of teams like that who were not quite top 15 range, but kind of borderline top 25, kind of probably going to get like a 2 seed in some kind of region for the NCAA tournament with teams like Arizona, Alabama, Dallas Baptist. I mean, that's 3 straight games of winnable games, very losable games. And that's where we're really going to see where Indiana is.
Mason, which non-conference games are you most looking forward to?
I will also tab Frisco because I will be there. So Frisco is going to be something that I'm really looking forward to.
Enjoy some barbecue.
You're taking your cowboy hat?
I might have to buy one.
Okay.
I might have to buy one. But
come back with a big old belt.
I do want to go back to. I do want to go back to a point that you made kind of with helping their schedule because Indiana and Jeff Mercer have scheduled like this consistently for years, but it has been more of a processional thing in the past, I think, and I think that's fair to say, where they go out to these series and it's not necessarily as competitive as they would like to be. Granted, it does end up paying off in the long run because, like you mentioned, the Big Ten isn't up there with some of these conferences that they're playing against some of the marquee teams in, but I think what the importance of this weekend in Coastal Carolina showed Indiana is for the first time they went into a series and they learned how to win some of these games, and they didn't go out there and just lose close. They lost close against Auburn last year. They lost close against Texas. In the years prior, it wasn't close. So they've kind of built each year up to this point where now they can go into an event like Frisco or they can host a team like Troy and feel confident, I think, about their chances going in, more so than just coach speak of being like, yeah, of course we're going to feel strongly about how we're entering a series. But now going in, they've got a little bit of a resume with them with their experience at Lexington last year, and now with some wins in Coastal. I think that sets them up well for the rest of this non-conference. So Frisco is what I'm looking forward to. I think Troy is an underrated series as well, but I think Indiana really needs to take care of business in Waco this weekend as well.
All right, Bern, are you hopping on the Frisco train?
No, I guess in order not to copy, I'm going to go with the Vanderbilt game. That's going to be at Vanderbilt. That was the replacement for Kentucky. And I think that these one-off games help Indiana in 2 ways. It helps Indiana, for Frisco, it helps Indiana for a regional format. And also just one-off wins look better. I think if you're going down to Vanderbilt to play a 3-game series, you're probably more susceptible to losing 2 out of 3. That doesn't look as good if you can just go in there, just a one-off game, and you can pull off an upset. That looks so much stronger. And in terms of Indiana's non-con schedule, I think it kind of works in 2 ways. I think that to really pick up those wins is going to help their RPI, but they also don't. On their schedule, there's also some not as good teams, and so if you're playing Butler in a 4-game set, maybe at the end of the year that's going to raise your win total. But if you were to split that 4-game set, that would really lower your RPI, and I just don't think that the committee is going to look at all 5 games and sort of judge off that. It's going to be collective stats with RPI, strongest wins, worst losses. So it's kind of a double-sided sword in that regard.
All right, before we head out, we got to keep this one a little bit snappy. Where do you think Indiana will fare in the Big Ten? Matt, you first.
Come on, EP.
I'm going to go
make
with
the Big Ten tournament.
I'm going to pick Indiana as finishing 2nd in the Big Ten. I think that Iowa is just a very, very good team this year. They return a lot of talent. They have the 2 starters in Brody Brecht and also Marcus Morgan. Those are 2 guys that are high on the draft boards. Some infield power coming back as well. They have postseason experience as well too. I think it's going to be a close race, but I do think that Iowa's going to get that top spot. And maybe it's only separated by a half a game or a game, but Indiana's going to be in that 2nd spot, no problem. Top 2 finish easily.
See, I was going back and forth on this still, and obviously
call me an EP.
you make a lot of good points for second, and I do think maybe if we're going off the pure point of rationality, I think second is probably the more reasonable argument you make. But I will make the argument for them winning the Big Ten this year. I think the pitching depth is something that obviously will be in question all season long, but the early returns on it look to be a little bit more positive than I think we would have. And that's not to say that it was going to be, by any means not up to Indiana standards, but I think they have to feel good about what they've seen through the first 4 games this year. We know what the bats can do. The defense looks solid so far, and I would assume that Indiana is going to continue to utilize this pitching by committee method. And if it works the way that it has so far, and Ryan Kraft returns to a little bit of form here, I could see Indiana assuming that top spot in the conference. So I'll go ahead and stick my limb out there and say Indiana wins the Big Ten this year.
Why not?
Has anyone ever predicted a tie in the Big Ten championship? I might say Indiana-Iowa tie. No, I think Indiana. I think if you look at what happened last year, that they really were out of Big Ten contention when they when they hosted Maryland and got swept those 3 games. Then they were out of it, and Maryland won it over Indiana. They don't play Iowa this year, so you don't get that series to kind of see who's the best. Indiana was just so good at being solid against teams they should beat, and not only winning the series but getting a lot of sweeps last year. That's going to be big to winning the Big Ten, and I'll take Indiana over Iowa.
So you did end up looking like EP.
Yeah, wow.
You can never win.
Way to go. You can't escape the allegations. It will always ring true for you, Matthew Burr. But a lot of season left for this team. And obviously a lot of this is just predictions, but this is a great group to follow along with Indiana baseball if that's what you want to spend your spring doing. But you're not going to want to miss what's coming up next on this toss-up. We have a very special guest joining the discussion. I'm going to kick them out of the studio as well, so don't go anywhere. Welcome back to the toss-up. I had to send the guys away for a bit because, like I said, we have a very special guest joining us, and that is none other than Brock Tibbitts of the Indiana baseball team. And Brock, welcome to the toss-up. It's a pleasure having you in studio here today.
Thank you for having me.
Yeah, so 4 games under your belt of the season so far. Had the 3 out in Myrtle Beach. How's it feel to be back repping the Cream and Crimson?
Feels awesome. I mean, you build up the whole fall, the winter, to be able to go out there and compete in the spring, and to be able to get out there and compete with, all the guys around me and, just get to play someone in a different uniform it's just awesome.
Want to look at that those 3 games out in Coastal Carolina. Played some good competition with Duke, Coastal, and even George Mason has been solid these past few years. I guess, how do you feel like yourself and then as a whole the team fared in those 3 games going 2-1 on the weekend?
I mean, I feel like we played really well. I mean, the biggest thing was just to get out there and compete and, see kind of what we had, how we can, stack up against other teams. And we went out there, we played really good defense, played well offensively, pitched the ball well, and, just went out there and played and see if the ball fell our way. And, one game it didn't, and the other 2 games it did. So just, continuing that throughout the course of the season.
I guess being able to beat Coastal in their own stadium, that's a ranked team. What were some of the emotions that you guys felt after that win?
I mean, that was definitely more of an emotional game, just all around. But, I mean, every game's a new opportunity. You don't start leading any game or another. So just going out there and being able to reset every day.
So I want to transition a bit back to the offseason when you're at the Brewster Whitecaps over the summer. Transition back to your catcher position after spending the past couple seasons at first base for Indiana. And I guess, what were some of the difficulties of going back to catcher? Obviously, you spent your high school days there.
Yeah, I mean, going back there this summer, it was definitely a little bit challenging at first. You're playing with guys you've never seen before. You don't really know them very well. So, being able to make that transition kind of with those new guys was definitely something that it really kind of just brought me back to my natural instincts, and it was just kind of a fight or flight moment and just kind of getting back in there and getting back into the situation. But, I mean, had an incredible experience out in the Cape, and, it really helped prepare me for this upcoming season.
So obviously it's one of the tougher summer leagues out in the summer collegiate baseball realm. And I guess with being at that catcher spot, what was something you tried to work on the most in that offseason, in fall, and I guess leading into this season?
Yeah, I think the biggest thing this summer was just getting back behind the plate, in-game experience, because, I mean, there's only so much that you can do, only so much you can replicate in a practice environment. So just getting into the game environment and being able to kind of see what the game is like behind the plate again, because it's so different being at first base than behind the plate. So just being able to kind of see what I needed to work on heading into the fall and being able to hit that heavy and just work on that and keep hammering that up until the season.
Now with that, once again, 4 games into the year, I've already seen you at first base and at catcher a few times. And I guess with your connection with guys like Jake Stadler, Joey B., how have you worked alongside them, like when you're rotating in and out as either the main first base guy or the main catcher?
Yeah, I mean, it's, being at first base the last 2 years, and then now being able to kind of be a mentor to guys like Joey B. and AJ Shepard. And, we've had a little bit of a revolving door of just kind of getting guys in there, but being able to just share as much wisdom as I can to those guys and be able to kind of help build their confidence so that if I'm not at first base, they can, step in and be that defensive guy at first base. And, behind the plate, Jake Stadler's he's a great guy to have there with you. Guys like TJ Schuyler, again, AJ Shepard as well. And just being able to, share as much information as possible and also take in as much information as possible because, I mean, you can always keep learning and always keep spreading wisdom to others.
Now, with more being behind the plate this season in particular, working with Stadler, how have you two kind of worked along with the pitching staff? Obviously, Sennard, that news broke back over the summer that he was going to be out for the year. So you're seeing a lot of new faces that you might not have worked with as much. How have you guys started to gel, whether it's the preseason, offseason, and now into the regular season? Yeah,
I mean, it's definitely a shared effort of being able to kind of work with the pitching staff because, you never know what guys you're going to catch when. So it's just being able to, be comfortable with everybody on the pitching staff and be able to build up everybody's confidence so that, whoever gets called in that, big time situation, that they're going to come in, they're going to do their job. And, it's our job behind the plate to be able to instill that confidence into them and so that they can be confident in us up on the mound.
I want to keep it on the realm of chemistry, and I believe last year was chess your guys' big thing.
There was a lot of guys who played chess last year, yeah.
Is that continuing into this year, or have you still trying to figure out what the true bonding experience is, or just kind of like laughing with the guys each game?
I mean, it's just I wouldn't say there's one specific thing, because chess was pretty big last year. I wouldn't say there's one specific thing, but I mean, just everybody in the locker room has come together so well, and it's one of the closer teams that I've been a part of, and everybody's, we're one big family. Everyone feels like a brother to me, and it's just been great to be able to go out there and play with all of them.
So obviously a lot of returners. You lose a couple guys like Phil, and that's a pretty big loss right there as a leader aspect. And now that you're a junior, you're an upperclassman on this program. What kind of goals do you have from mentoring some of the younger guys, or maybe not even mentoring, but just being an ear to listen to, maybe keeping their head up in different moments?
Yeah, I mean, I just kind of put myself back in the shoes of when I was a freshman, and some of the older guys would just instill a bunch of wisdom in us and kind of keep us going. So when you get called in that moment as a freshman, you're not just thinking about the moment. You're able to just go in and compete. So being able to take some of that I learned freshman year, and being able to instill that in some of the young guys and some of the transfers to just be able to get everybody rowing the ship the same direction, and be able to get everybody going the same way.
Were there any specific names from your first 2 years of a guy you looked up to more, maybe a handful?
Yeah, I mean, there was a handful of guys. Philip Glasser was one of them. Bobby Whalen was a great leader for all of us. Guys like Hunter Jesse, Pete Cerruto, Matthew Ellis, a few guys like that who are just older guys, more experienced, and were able to help us, like kind of guys like me, Josh, Carter, Grant, Ryan, when we were freshmen, playing down at Clemson and had no idea what was going on.
Is there something in particular that they have said to you that's kind of like rung true? Maybe it was the moment you got to IU, or just at some point within the past couple seasons?
I wouldn't say there was one specific moment. It was, again, just them being able to draw on their past experience and be able to, help us out to get over the hump of like, hey, you're playing college baseball now. Like this is a different animal. So just being able to get past that.
So I want to keep it on a bit of the goals side and more of your personal goals as a player. Obviously, last season you're named to an All Big Ten team. I'm not sure how much you pay attention to that, how much motivation it gives you, and I guess what are your goals as a player for the Indiana baseball team this year?
I mean, honestly, individually, it's whatever happens, happens. But I have more team-based goals. Just being able to help the team win. Whatever that may be. Whether the moment comes where I need to lay down a bunt, whether that's playing catcher, playing first base, whatever the game asks me to help the team win and be able to, get where we want to get to.
Now, Brock, before we head out, I do want to ask you, have back-to-back weekends of heading to Texas, this upcoming weekend in Waco, and then next week in Dallas, the Frisco area. Are you excited to take on one of the biggest states in the country?
Absolutely, absolutely.
And I guess with some of those matchups, especially in Frisco, you're playing tournament teams. You're playing teams that have made regional, super regional. What's it like for a team that made regional last year to be up with some top-level competition?
Yeah, I mean, it kind of puts us back into that area of, we were in a regional last year. We didn't, have the finish that we wanted to, but I mean, that's all. Especially the guys that were here last year, we just got a taste of it, and we're hungry for more. So being able to stack up against those teams and see where we're at, I think is a huge thing to do in the beginning of the year.
Now, one final question before we head out. I'm not going to keep it one word because that's too easy. I'll do a phrase. What would you describe this season of Indiana baseball as from the start?
I would say it's going to be exciting.
People got to keep their eyes out for Indiana baseball. But, Brock, thank you so much for joining us here today. That's going to wrap up another episode of The Toss-Up. Be sure to follow along with The Toss-Up 23 and at The Toss-Up IU on both Instagram and Twitter, respectively, as well as both IUSTV Sports on both platforms. With that, there's only one thing left to do, as of course, toss it up. I always catch it. We'll see you next time.